Good evening to everybody. This is Stefano from Italy. We are waiting for Ian that is coming from US. It will be like a very interesting stream today with a lot of discussion. It's an open roundtable. There will be probably some of our speakers that is coming. So be prepared. I will start with economical and geopolitical introduction with the same data that I'm trying to give you as usual. So today I will try to add something more from Russian from a Russian website that is called the Bell, where I found a lot of very interesting information. So let's start from some oil and gas economical data and then move to the actual economical situation. So let me try to put with something like this. Key points. We can see that the Russian monthly fossil fuel export fell by 10%. So the situation that we are still talking about the Russian export, it's going worse and worse every month, but we will analyze later also the military output of this situation. France LNG, so natural liquefied gas imports from Russia rose 50% month-on-month. So we can see that it's very interesting, the situation that also LNG market, it's completely like a free bullet on all the sanction situation and whatever. And we can see that Turkey is increasing also still the import from Russia 14%. And India's monthly import of Russian crude oil dropped the second straight month. So we will see later, China is still the biggest importer of Russian oil and gas. The average price of Urals and East Siberia Pacific Ocean both rose 7.3%. So the oil price is going up. And from introduction of the oil sanction, we can see that the price cap that is actually not in application. The price cap that was proposed by this publication, that is the KRIA publication, I will put like in the link in the description, was probably slashing the revenues by 9%. Let's see the same graph that we are trying to propose every publication. So we can see that the Russian fossil fuel export decreased a lot. Now it's stable. But the revenue drop off from the top of 1.5 billion a day to the actual state that it's about 700 million. That it's mainly half of the revenue before. What is like the top 5 importers of Russian fossil fuel? We can see that it's still China, Turkey, and let me see if Ian can join us. Okay. Wait a sec. Because the system changed the link. Okay. Sorry for the delay, but Let me see if it's working. Okay. Ian, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So probably the link changed when I changed the time zone, like the time.
Yeah, there's another member in the old link. I posted the link in there.
Yeah. But I already posted also to Isla and Telegram. So I was trying to show the economical data fastly while you were coming. When we can talk about. Adesso Isla is here. Hi Isla. Sorry for the link, but it changed with the change of the time. So I was trying to introduce like the update of oil and gas and a little bit of economical data, and then we will move to military and everything that is like the Ian field. No big updates on Russian fossil fuel export revenue, so it's the same. It's about 700 million per day. We can see that there is like a rose up of 10% in January. Why? We can see later who is still buying in majority the fossil fuel, and we can see from the update it's from the data that is made the data analysis from CREA. That the biggest importer of coal is China with 39%. China is still the largest buyer of Russian crude oil, 52%, followed by India and EU. And EU is still like Hungary, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Bulgaria. LNG, it's like the European Union largest buyer. So we can see that we are not buying anymore pipeline oil, but we are buying 50% of the Russia LNG export. Second, China, third, Japan. So the biggest importer of Russian LNG, it's European Union. Pipeline gas, we will see like European Union is still like the largest buyer, 39%, but it's going only on the fatherhood. On the south pipeline through Ukraine, only to these countries that I said in advance. It's Hungary, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Czech Republic, and Serbia, that is outside of European Union. And this is like the synthesis of the data about like the import of fuels. So about the ports, this is interesting. Isla, you asked me the last time about where is going and about third country that could be like buyers in of Russian oil and gas through third countries. We can see that India, the port of Sikka, it's the biggest transit port of Russian fossil fuels. Then you have Singapore, then China, then Turkey, then China. So it's interesting because LNG it's not going through these ports, and only oil products and crude oil. Okay, then I have other data, but I will show later. So Ian, okay, can you hear us?
Yeah. I was just waiting for you to finish up.
Yeah. I put some slides while you were coming, only like to start the stream, and I saw your stream about like the Frontline. If you can like synthesize, in your opinion, what is happening, and maybe we can talk with Isla about it. So we have like also the Russian point of view on this chat.
Yeah, I mean, basically just to give a quick rundown of what's going on. with the battle, in the aftermath of the Battle of Avdiivka, there's some notable changes in the or paradigm shifts, I guess you can say, in what's going on in the war. First, something that I think definitely needs to be addressed, and this was originally pointed out by the War in Ukraine channel, which you'd actually we talked about the other day when we were on phone call, and I'd went and watched some of this stuff, and he pointed out a very interesting aspect of the battle, and that's that the Russian units that carried out the fight were actually ordinary line infantry, motorized infantry, and that's very different compared to the battles that have happened in the war so far. The big key battles like Bakhmut was Wagner mercenaries and paratroopers on the flanks, and of course, all these battles, regular line troops were present, but the initiative was carried out by elite units. And then you have the situation in Popasna was you know done by Wagner, as well as the Russian victory over Lysychansk and Severodonetsk was a combination of Wagner forces and VDV paratroopers. So it's a pretty big change that Russia was able to carry out the initiative, and it's such a rapid collapse of a fortified urban zone with just ordinary line troops, and to do it so quickly. And they were relatively fresh units, and they're not, in terms of like experienced units, they weren't. I believe it was three or four brigades that basically massed and attacked in a concentrated area, and there's nothing special about them. So it shows that either Russia has got a new competent commander, which is different from the past. There's been a lot of incompetent Russian commanders, or the Russian war machine is starting to function closer to what it was designed to do. Finally, so one or the other doesn't really matter. It's kind of bad for Ukraine, and you can tell that combined with general ammo shortages, manpower shortages for Ukraine, probably also funding troubles, has started to show some cracks in the Ukrainian front line, and they have not stopped the Russian advance west of Avdiivka. The Russians have seized or are on the verge of seizing another, six smaller, farming settlements after Avdiivka. Now, some of these might still have Ukrainian contest inside of them. Of course, Ukraine could, always has the option to counterattack. So, I can't say for certain if the Russians actually hold on to all of them right now. But, there's some pretty severe risk of, losing quite a bit more territory directly west of Avdiivka. And then on other places of the front line, of course, you're seeing, some major Russian efforts and then some smaller ones. What my hypothesis is that the Russian command basically is given a general order to begin probing of the Ukrainian line all along the front, to try and find some weaknesses and test the strength of the Ukrainian army. So you're seeing attacks virtually everywhere. Now, not all of these are going to turn into something, of course. Some of them actually are doing quite poorly, like the Russian assault in Novomihailovka. There's some recent drone footage that's come out that's shown extremely heavy losses of uh, armored vehicles to the south of town. Either this happened through the course of time, or it happened, all at once with, a Russian column ambushed, going into town. Either way, still some strengths in the Ukrainian defense, probably still some incompetent Russian leadership. Robotny is another one where the Russians tried to seize Robotny, and initially it seemed like they're having some success and push the Ukrainians out of town. But a Ukrainian counterattack, at least according to recent reports, has pushed the Russians back out of town there. So, general probing, a couple places where we're seeing some serious advance, like Avdiivka, Stepove, immediately west of Bakhmut, and for now it appears like the main next goal is Krasnogorovka, because the Russian movement west of Avdiivka can actually have quite a bit of effect on Krasnogorovka to the south. There's not good defensive lines that have been built west of Avdiivka yet. There are some, but they're further west. There's quite a bit of no man's land, I guess you can call it, or untouched ground in between the two. Probably a lot of minefields, but it's definitely an area where Russia can advance through much quicker than they have been in other places in the Donbass. So if the Russians end up advancing far enough west, they can start turning south, and they can turn the northern flank of Krasnogorovka, which is also, a bunch of flat fields, no real settlements, difficult territory to defend, especially if they're defending it from the wrong direction. So, on top of that, the Russians have tried to enter Krasnogorovka from the south. It seems like initially they had some success in that, but there's also some recent news of Ukrainian counterattacks. It seems like the third Azov Brigade, or at least elements of the third Azov Brigade, were redeployed to Krasnogorovka, and they're engaged in fighting there. Now, their claim is that they've forced the Russians back out of town, but the geolocated footage of that is not necessarily in the same place that the Russians entered the town. It's a little bit further north, so their footage actually kind of indicates that the Russians penetrated a little bit deeper into town than initially thought. But that's a general summary of what's going on the battle lines right now. Of course, there's some other places, like if you want to talk up north, there's a bit of activity directly to the east of Liman, where the Russians are trying to push the river. But I haven't seen anything verifiable there. I would guess that also, the Russians are not having the kind of success that they're having there as they are in the Avdiivka area.
If I can ask it to you, I was watching Dima from Military Summary, and he promised me that the next time we will be able to make a roundtable with you, and I also hope with Wyatt from Defense Politics Asia, like returning back to the big one that we did like in October 2022. So in his analysis of yesterday, he was talking about let's say the construction of let's say a defense system. Okay, someone is coming. Oh, so Defense Politics Asia.
Hello. Hi,
Talking
Ian.
about the devil, I was talking about you and you came. Amazing. So in a good way. So I said that Dima from Military Summer promised to return back in a roundtable also with you, and so we will try to make it. And I was talking that Dima was making an analysis yesterday about the construction of a defensive line between the northern part of Kiev and the northern part of Kharkiv. So my sensation is that actually the situation in the east is that Ukrainians are not able to sustain a defense and they're retreating. And I was talking also with a friend today that is, let's say, some connection with military complex in Italy, and he was talking to me that actually the problem is still the war in Israel, that US it's giving all the shells and ammo available to Israel, and we are rebuilding our stockpiles. So the main problem is that the European defense complex is rebuilding the stockpile in Europe and are not giving the full amount of shell that Ukraine needed. And the US is focused on Israel. So, and everything, it's a little bit stocked also of, let's say, the intervention of foreign policy by Trump in this actual electoral year in the US. So, returning back from the beginning, what do you think about this situation where like the Russians are like increasing the pressure on East, but the Ukrainians are, let's say, trying to start a defense system in the north. We at Ian, whatever you want, Islam.
So the Russians basically had been preparing for this war. So the war have started. They are totally unprepared for a long war. So that's what we saw, and that is also exactly what's happening, which is why we saw that the Russians have enacted new legislations. They did the partial mobilization, and the refurbishing of new equipments, the restarting of the wartime sort of manufacturing, and we are seeing the results right now. So all this started around June-ish, August, and around August, I think Russia realized that they're in deep shit. And by September, the Ukrainians launched their first offensive in the Balaklia region. They also call it the Kharkiv offensive, which we saw the Russian forces getting pushed all the way down to the eastern part of Oskil River. And then after that, they follow up with the Kherson offensive. They're pushing south, and which eventually led to the Russians decided to leave the northern bank of the Dnipro River. So and it was then they do the partial mobilization, and the first wave of mobilized troops was immediately thrown into the front line without training. Despite they say that they're going to get at least 2-3 weeks of training, the first badges was immediately thrown. So it is a sign that they actually is totally unprepared. But since then, they have already built up all this new equipment. They are like, I have done a video just a few days, these 2 days. I just published it like 12 hours ago. So the Shoigu was boasting about the increased production, the modernization of the forces. Like, he's not even talking about the forces that is now in Ukraine. He's talking about like the center forces that was in charge of the borders in the Central Asia region. Over 50% of their equipments are now new, modernized. So that is like a very cold front line, but a very cold border as opposed to facing the NATO side, and they already have 50% of their equipments refurbishing to the new ones. So the Russian has already become a lot more prepared for this war. But on the Ukrainian side, we see the total reverse. They can't get the equipment from the United States. A lot of the promised Abrams tanks are not here yet, and they are expanding almost all their Leopard tanks, and they have to throw in the Abrams, and we already have 2 confirmed losses that is being recorded. So
we had a question for you and Diane, because I was talking with this guy that was very prepared in like him, let's say, but in military today, and they said to me that also if you send 1,000 Abrams, if you don't have like air superiority, you can not use like the NATO tactics in this scene. And they don't have it, and without the air superiority, you cannot make any type of offensive.
It's not just you don't need 1,000 tanks, but let's say you talk about a smaller front line, you will still need air support. If you've seen NATO strategies, NATO tactics, you are going to have air superiority, you're going to have a close air support, and then you're going to have attack helicopters. And if you look at how the Ukrainians has fight, the attack helicopters do not perform in the same way how a Apache or a Cobra operates in the front line. They do not hover and fire. They do not conduct direct fire support to take out the prime targets. And it's very different, which is why it's a surprise when I was like, when I was looking at the Ukrainians, I was thinking, how the hell are they going to start the counteroffensive when they actually do not have the right helicopters for it? They have no air superiority. And yeah, so which is why it failed very badly, because that's just how NATO fight. NATO always fight with air superiority, which is why it's very heavy on the Air Force, Western militaries, including Singapore. Singapore military is a Western military, so we have ridiculous amount of Air Force. Like, we have the most powerful Air Force in Southeast Asia. So we have probably more fighter jets than the whole Baltic states combined. So the thing is that the Ukraine right now don't even have the Air Force that can even compete with Singapore. We are just one small little country. Like we have 100 fighter jets. They don't even have 100 right now, I believe. So there is, and then they are fighting a much more bigger front line. They are like, Ukraine is so big. So it is a conundrum, and I think whatever happening in United States is severely affecting Ukraine, and the future is going to be much worse. And this contrast with the Europe is quite sad, because the European leaders have overcommitted themselves. They have talk too much. They have create this narrative about Russia is evil and Russia is not good. That the Russians is going to invade Europe and they need to stop them in Ukraine. And they have sell this narrative for 2 years very hard. They sell it very hard. And now, if let's say they want to pull back, they want to stop to support, they can't, because they have already overcommitted, especially countries like Germany, United Kingdom, especially Germany. They basically have went all in. They basically have put all their chips into this thing, like everything. The Nord Stream pipeline got destroyed. They don't investigate. They do not fight for their own national interest to say, hey, what the hell is this? And then stop everything, force a dialogue. They don't. They immediately still went all in. In fact, after the Nord Stream was destroyed, Germany went all in. So if you look at what is happening right now, Germany is really pushing everything. They are the one that is they are pushing just as hard or even more than United Kingdom in the support of Ukraine. So, and the United Kingdom is another one that overcommitted itself as well. So Europe in general is now very overcommitted, and that's actually a very, very bad sign. And it's like, if the politicians cannot take a step back, then they will double down. Then that's the fear.
Okay, let me say to you this thing. I had like this strange, interesting conversation with one person like in live about this, very well connected. And the problem is that you said the right thing, that the European countries are let's say super committed in this, but it's a huge problem because they are discussing to restart and re-weaponize like the states. And the increase of the defense, it's every time a huge problem when like the European states start to re-weaponize. Let's talk only about Germany. The last 2 times were not good, let's say, if we can remember the history. And technically, the Wehrmacht and Luftwaffe and everything that was about the German army in the last 70 years was mainly nothing, except like during the Cold Era and the Cold War. The only defense let's say plan that is still active and was very busy, that was not an international plan, was with France, with the Dassault. That it's curious because it's not a state company. Like in Italy, we can say that the defense is completely like state-owned by a company that is called Leonardo. It's the 5th biggest exporter in the world. But with Dassault, it's interesting because it's a family business. You can check, it's not in the stock market. It's very interesting. And Rheinmetall, it's if you compare like in the size of exporters, it's even smaller than Leonardo. So Germany, it's big as an economy, but not big as like defense plan. So if they will increase and we start to push the 100 billion euro that they promised in talkings in the defense, it's not an amazing news. But for all Europe, because it's problematic, because if you invest in this budget, you need to use it. You can not only like put in the stockpile forever. And another sensation that I've got from now, that I already said many times, was that the help that all the states gave to the Ukraine, also I think Russia at the beginning, the things that they use, they were all things from the stockpile. So especially like, let's say that I check the materials that were given from Italy was not new things. So the sensation that I've got was that we gave what we have and we didn't use, and now the defense complex is restarting to filling the stockpiles with new things and new contracts. And so it's not a super good signal for Ukraine, as I think. And let's say
Actually
just
have interesting point there before you move on. I think Wyatt kind of touched on this earlier. I mean, it's not really on the main topic, but it's important to note that the war up till now really has been fought with stockpiled equipment on all sides, and that's kind of, you know, you have the U.S., Germany, France sending Ukraine all of their old stuff, not really wanting to give up much of their new stuff. Even most of the Leopards were older models, and some of them were a bit newer, but they were probably I mean, they're probably still older than 20 years or 15 years old. And on the Russian side, a lot of older stuff, especially a lot of the support that they've gotten from, say, Iran or North Korea. North Korea is doing the exact same thing that the West is doing with all these shells that they're sending to Russia. They're emptying out their old stockpiles so they can build new stuff. So by and large, it's the same concerning picture worldwide, where countries basically, I mean, it's almost like a repeat of the Spanish Civil War, except for it's less emphasis on testing out new weapons and tactics, and more emphasis on disposing of expensive to maintain old ammunition and stuff, just to try to, you know, stick it to the other side. So I mean, yes, like I think everyone should be kind of concerned about Germany rearming. We don't want to see you know, car factories, you know, we want them to stay Volkswagen-y and not so Panzery. You know, like, we don't really want you know, what's going on, but unfortunately that's kind of the direction it's going.
Yeah, it's so pro-Russia. No. Ukraine need the weapons, man. You know, you how can you say that? No, Ukraine need it. Germany need to build it for them.
I can send you an example of this thing, and this way, if you want to talk.
A common security arrangement would have prevented all of these problems if before the war, if it was accepted, the Russian proposal for a common security arrangement in Europe. It wouldn't have had to go to the war, wouldn't have had to rearm Europe, wouldn't have had to do basically any of it. And now, at this point, I don't even know if there is a way to stop the current progression of events. Stefano, you talk about peace, you know, pretty much every time, you know, we have conversations. Like, the mechanisms for peace are not there anymore, and you can imagine where the situation will continue to develop.
Isla, my point of view, it's very simple, and I in all these 2 years, I never did a prediction, but I return back to the first video that we did with DPA military analysis, military summary, and war in Ukraine. It was May 2022. Okay, so let's say that all of the parts were already rushing that the war, let's say, is going and finishing fastly. The Russians are superior, blah, blah, blah. So I know very good Russians. Let's say that I went there many times, easily, you know, and I know like that Russians can survive better than the Westerner in like the way of resilience. My problem it's another thing. Ukrainians are like Russian in the state of mind. They can be now a little bit more westernized, but it's still the same, like cousins, brotherhood, blah blah blah. What I'm saying is what I asked all the times when I asked to the Ukrainian speakers. what you can seed or make, let's say, to make an agreement with Russia to stop the war? Because for the last 2 years, when I asked this question, they said we cannot seed anything. And in my point of view, the problem is still the same. The actual state of the war is, let's say, on the side of the Russian for the time. But the problem is that we don't know the real reaction that it will be before November and after November. My point of view, it's like US election. It will be very problematic for everything. I have like the polls for the Russian election. Let me only show this. For me, like the results, it's like obvious that Putin will be reelected. And so the position, the other candidates, is like have no chance, also because there is no real good candidates. You can see have 3%.
I don't even know these people, to be honest.
Okay, so this is like the actual. Nadezhin was like cancelled. He cannot be candidate. The others are like no objective, real candidates that could be, let's say, a threat for Putin. So Putin will be reelected. The only things that will be interesting, it will be how much is the percentage of voters, not the quantity of the votes, because it could be 60-70% of voters for Putin. But the important thing is to see how much people will go to vote. It's the same of Iran. The ruling party is winning, but we need to see the percentage. Actually, I think that the last polls that were made by Levada Institute in Russia were putting a trend that the population also in Russia is starting to get pissed off about the situation of the war. So it's only a trend, but it's going on.
I can share a bit more. I can share. So Singapore have a massive majority in terms of ruling party. So similar, to Russia. So the People's Action Party usually wins like 90% of the seats. So, but 90% of the seats is not 90% of the votes. So the votes is usually around 60%. So 2/3 of the people will vote for the ruling party. So, and for the government, for the ruling party, what they care about is the percentage, how much it jumps. If does it increase or reduce their rule. So to Putin is a similar thing. Is basically they are just using this percentage to see other people happy with him. And to win or not win is like a given, like the result is a foregone conclusion. Confirm Putin will be president. It's just a matter of did it increase or did it reduce. Similar in Singapore, it's the same thing. Usually is does it increase or reduce. So every time it reduces, the government will panic. The ruling party will panic, and you start to take a look. What did they do wrong? And usually it's quite obvious because they I believe just like in Russia, they have very strong roots into all the ground. People will inform. They have a whole chain of command to inform what is actually wrong. Sometimes, so for massive ruling parties like Singapore or Russia, what happens is that they will make difficult decisions or hard decisions that people do not like, and sometimes they go over a bit too much. Then what happens is that people will react through voting, and then they realize, okay, this is a bit too much. We cannot go on this path anymore. We need to hold back a bit. So, but that is about it. But if you look at Tucker Carlson's interview with Lex Fridman, he basically commented that he asked the question about the elections to the officials around Putin. They don't even know when is the election because it was such an unimportant thing to them because it was a foregone conclusion. So in Singapore is almost the same. We love the election because it's a public holiday, but the reality is that we all know who is going to win because there is just no other appropriate candidates to vote for. Because do you really want to vote for opposition that will destabilize your country? Because even if they don't make policies that destabilize the country, the perception from outside is that the country becomes not the same anymore. And the same thing, if Putin is suddenly die, he suddenly have a heart attack, he died. Our first reaction will be, what happens to Russia next? Despite that, the Russia is actually a very big country with huge bureaucracy, everything remains the same, just one person die, is a perception. So I think, I just want to share a bit about this massive majority party rule. It's very hard for people who don't live in this kind of world to understand, because they're so used to bickering political parties.
Especially during a war, if he dies or if something happens, Russian people. So to the extent I am able to generalize, because of course Russians are sort of in general very critical of the government, of their leaders, and so on. There's a lot of harsh language going on, but during the war and in public, in general, Russians are going to band together behind their leadership, even if they don't like their leadership and criticize their leadership. There's like, I don't know how else to say it. There was this sort of anecdote: I can criticize my country, you cannot criticize my country. That sort of opposition to the outside forces. Well, it's not just Russian, right? Pretty much any people would band together around their leadership when some kind of outside enemy is presented to them. If I may say, sort of in comparison, in relation to the topic, comparing Russia and Ukraine, sure, Ukrainians and Russians are very similar people, but Ukraine and Russia as countries with the resources available to them are dramatically different. Ukraine basically has no strategic depth, to the extent I am able to use that term. Russia has, if not, well, probably the most strategic depth of any country anywhere around the globe. You can basically restore production, manufacturing of an entire country from behind the Ural Mountains. Which is what they did during the Second World War. So there is like, compared to Ukraine, Russia has 20 more steps of escalation, well, arbitrarily speaking, that they could still go in terms of a real serious war. This is not a serious war for Russia. Well, it is a serious war, but not like maximum mobilization kind of war. So from the very beginning of this conflict, if we're going to pit Ukraine versus Russia, Ukraine never stood a chance militarily. Literally, the only hope the West had is something magical happening in Russia, and they completely misjudged Russian political consensus and bet on that misjudgment. Now, you don't like, sorry for rambling, but one last point. You don't like predicting, Stefano. I predict all the time. And on your channel, I predicted, because that's the most fun to me. Sorry. On your channel a year ago, I said, and maybe not once actually, that Americans are going to abandon Ukraine. This is what they're doing right now. As you said,
what I was saying, it was different. Is that today I will try to make my own, because it's the same thing that I said from the beginning. But my discussion is a little bit more complicated. What I wanted to say to you and the others is that the consensus in Russia of Putin is very strange. With data, it's about the Levada Institute, that it's like the most, let's say, affordable polls, and let's say independent in Russia. And we can see that the biggest problem of consensus of Putin was during the pension reform and the COVID lockdown. So it was not about annexation of Crimea, let's say war in Ukraine, everything. The biggest problem for the Russian consensus in the leadership was when they increased the age of pensions. So, and we can see that was in between 2018 and 2019. And I was, let's say, in this day that it's a little bit special because it was like the funeral of Navalny, and it's very interesting because when I was talking with a friend, let's say in government in Russia, in the 2020, they were starting to be a little bit, let's say, in apprehension because Navalny was good in, let's say, taking the votes of the new generation. So the problems about the elite, the Siloviki at the beginning of 2020, 2021, before, let's say, the COVID, it was the beginning of 2020, was about the political reaction of the new generation with new leaders. With different approach, let's say not with the Soviet generation. The actual problem is that the life expectation of a Russian male is below 70, practical. So if I increase the age of pension at 68, you will get pension for 1-2 years. So a lot of people will be pissed off. This why like the Russian were like a little bit complaining with the leadership. What I wanted to say was a little more complicated issue. In my opinion, it's my prediction is like this. There is a very interesting video made by the Senator McCain before he died. I don't know if you saw it, but I will push it. So it's very fast. And he said what Putin will do. It was 2017. What Putin will do will try to take the Donbass, take after Crimea, and take the land bridge from Crimea to Donbass. And we will not give a weapon that Ukraine will need because we will not to piss off Putin. So this is a video that I can show you later. It's from 2017, interview of Senator McCain. The thing is that, and McCain is Republican, not Democrats. What can change about the election in US? It's complicated because the problem is about also the internal Russian economy. The GDP growth that we can see here in the graph is generated by the war economy. And the effect of the war economy in the mid and long term, it's disaster because you cannot reconvert that factory at the end of the war. It's very difficult. So the problem is it's not good because the actual, let's say, capacity of production, let's say the car industries in Russia, now 70% of the cars are from China. Okay, so Russia changed the car, let's say, suppliers from European and US and internal production, and they change in Chinese production. But Chinese producers are not producing in Russia like before Ford or Volkswagen or whatever they were doing. They're also pushing the production in China and exporting in Russia. It's a big problem because let me show something interesting. It's like budget and revenue and expenditure. So the budget that the state industries is pushing in the defense, it's huge. So you don't have unemployment in Russia now because you don't have people to hire. It's very simple because the people is sent to the front and all the other is pushed to the defense complex. But when the war will end, and it will end, it could be 1 month, 1 year, 5 years, whatever it will be, you will have to convert that industry. And let me show this. When you have a compression between these two lines, and it's the actual situation in Russia, you can see the unemployment is going down because you don't have people to hire, not because the market is going well. It's not more work. You have less people. So what I wanted to arrive, and I will show something later, is that this situation is not good for anybody except for one category, that is like the defense industry. So the defense is making money, but the world market is not going well. And also Chinese is not going well, because China is like, we can talk about it later. Russia tried to exchange the Western market to the Chinese market, but the Chinese market now it's in deflection. So in midterm, it's not an amazing like overcome of this choice. So also for Russia, it's good like to finish the war in a time that it's not super long. What do you think? Ian, take the word, Isla. Open.
I don't know actually who is doing well right now, to be honest. What country? It's like, what country is doing well right now?
Okay, let me put. Okay, let me show something. So this is the actual situation about growing economic ties between Russia and China. So this is the main problem. That is like what I said to you about the China's economic deflection. And Wiata was pushing another interesting thing about Singapore, because the second biggest port of transit of Russian fossil fuel is Singapore now. So this is interesting because Singapore, it's a little bit, let's say, a free port to move fossil fuels. The first, it's still India, and the second it's Singapore. But it's interesting because India now, it's like for the second month that it's decreasing the import of fossil fuels. And so like this goal time of export to other countries, I think that's going down. The growth projection, Islam. So this is like IMF 2023, 2024, 2025 global economy, advanced economy. You see that it's a lower increase because it's already high GDP. And the emerging markets and developing economies are, let's say, 4.1, 4.2. Who is like in a good state? About inflation, we can see that US, the inflation is going down. So the prediction for this year is 2%. The Eurozone, it's the average is less than 3%, but it was 7%, so it's good. Russia, it's 5%. China, it's 1.9%, but it's not good, because the returning back, the problem is that the deflation state, it's that when the price of production, it's going down instead of going up. So the people is not buying stockpile, it's cost less, production cost less. It's like a circle that it's not letting you go out. So who is going well as state? I mean, about GDP, I think in this situation, not European Union, US is not going bad. The problem also about the subsidies of the Ukraine, you can see that the US aid to Ukraine, 70% remained in US. It's interesting because all the US aid was mainly developed to defense industries, and so they were selling weapons but produced in US. So it's like a circle. It's not like fiscal aid directly given to Ukraine. The European Union was different because the aid that were given to Ukraine was to paying the public salaries. So US money were going to produce weapons. European money mostly like to paying like the internal public salaries of Ukraine.
Not to interrupt you, Stefano, but I'm kind of
I finished. So
I'm kind of interested in this John McCain video, and then if you want to jump into US
politics, I will put it
go there.
But if you can tell your point, I will search the video and I will put.
Yeah, I mean,
About mainly, Ian, if you can talk your opinion about the US situation and position now before the election in November, and what is your point of view about what is the aid to Ukraine actually and from now till the election?
so I mean, I'm in terms of the Ukraine aid, I'm really not sure. I think there's a chance that some money ends up eventually going, but they're not going to get the 60 billion that they're talking about. If they do get money, it'll be far less than even half that number. I would imagine, but it seems like Congress is pretty deadlocked. So I can't really speak on that too much. But in terms of U.S. elections and U.S. economy, um, I mean, there's some pretty deep and systemic problems that I mean, it would we could spend over an hour talking about it just as it is. But couple good books that I've read in the past and working on now. One is The Storm Before the Calm by George Friedman. He predicted a decade ago that there would be political instability in the U.S. in the 2020s based on a cyclical model of American history that he developed. It's very fascinating. And another more recent book, a historian, Peter Turchin, has created a model that he's applied specific economic factors throughout history, and his model accurately predicts revolution and civil war for every major civil war that's happened around the world. The Taiping Rebellion in China, the Russian Revolution, all the French Civil Wars, the War of the Roses, and the British Isles. You name it, and the model. If you plug in the information, then the model will tell you basically exactly that. And moving into the future, it predicts the same thing that George Friedman suggests, that there's going to be extreme political instability and possibility for violence, I guess you'll say. Because I mean, not to predict the future, because knowing
that
these
it
things,
will be another step in
you can go ahead and play it, and I can finish after if you'd like.
predict to you that it will be another step in Vladimir Putin's strategy to separate eastern Ukraine from Ukraine and perhaps a land bridge to Crimea. No, it's a very bad result. And again, we would not send weapons to the Ukrainians when they were begging for them. We wouldn't even give them intelligence because we didn't want to, quote, provoke Vladimir Putin. By showing weakness, we provoked Vladimir Putin. We have to understand that Vladimir Putin's ambitions are the restoration of the old Russian Empire.
But he has never said, has he, that he wants eastern Ukraine to be incorporated into Russian territory?
What he has said is, well, just a few days ago, he said, I could take Kiev in 2 weeks. But what he has said is that he wants Nova Russia, which is an old Tsarist phrase, which means he wants eastern Ukraine. He wants to make sure he keeps Crimea, and he would like to see, if he can get away with it, Moldova and the Baltics as well. That's what he wants to see restored. He cannot afford to see a free, democratic, prosperous Ukraine, because the Russian people then would like to be like Ukraine. There's nothing that provokes Vladimir Putin more than weakness.
And this interview is 2014. So
yeah, a little bit of foreshadowing there. But my problem with him there is he contradicts himself, saying that Russia wants to take all of Ukraine and restore the Russian Empire, and then the reporter says, well, what about eastern Ukraine? And then he mentions, well, what they want's Novorossiya, which is precisely what Vladimir Putin's claims have been on, right? So I mean, it's certainly possible that Vladimir Putin would like all of Ukraine and the Baltics and all that stuff. There's been some geopolitical strategists that have pointed out that Russia is not secure without, plugging those gaps, because those are the places where they've been invaded from. But like the main thing, that the issue that I have with statements like that is when it comes to U.S. politics and really just politics in general. nothing gets accomplished unless you exaggerate the problem. And a key example of that is, say, like the climate stuff, like trying to get climate things passed. If you tell the population that, we're seeing some troubling signs, we might get a little bit of sea level rise, a little bit of temperature rise, some wildfires, maybe we should take a little bit better care of the planet. People are going to say, well, to hell with that, I'm trying to start a logging company, right? But if you tell people, oh, the world's going to end unless we do this, then that's how you get real voter support for it. So it's given, it comes from both sides. Like, perhaps maybe one day that is an ambition of Vladimir Putin, but I mean, he's getting old. He's 70 years old, and I can't imagine Russia at their current state launching a war like that.
I will put it even simpler. Any country, you give them a chance to have a free territory, free resources, they will take it. So if you give a chance for Austrian-Hungarian Empire to return, they will want it. If you give a chance for Germany to return to their Holy Roman Empire size, they'll take it. As long as there's no consequences, they will take it. So the matter of whether a country like Russia wants more territory, it's just a matter of how much pushback is there. If there's sufficient pushback, there's enough risk, there's enough consequences, then they will not try. The same thing goes for like Taiwan. Like, why China have not even invaded Taiwan? They boasted all this military and whatnot because they cannot afford the consequences. It's not that they don't want Taiwan. Anyone wants more territory. If you say Singapore don't want more land, more islands, bigger territory because Singapore is so small, it's nonsensical. Of course, we would want more land. We want to have our own hinterlands and whatnot, but we can't because that will mean war, and that will not be a war that we can sustain. Even if we win in the short term, we can't win in the long term. So the consequences are the reasons why it stops people from stealing, from murder, and from conquering more land. So if you give Putin a chance to become more like, to give Putin to become a Tsar and have a chance to restore the great Russian Empire, of course, he will probably dream about it, 100%. But there's a consequence to it. Do you want to war with NATO? Can you afford a war with NATO? Yeah, I think it's just about this. So, which is why, like NATO is the same thing. When the fall of the Cold War, the fall of the USSR, the NATO at first, they never thought that they wanted to continue to expand eastward. But after Russia seems to be so weak, they just keep expanding eastward, taking more and more countries because there's no pushback. There's no consequences to bringing more country into NATO, bringing the Frontline closer to Moscow. So this is just geopolitics. It's just natural thing that people will do. So it's just a pushback.
And if you think about Russia, in this specific key what I just described, but without Putin, because I honestly think this war wasn't a Putin's war, like so many Western analysts would want you to believe. It was very crucial Russian war to protect its strategic interests. If you imagine Russia after this war, if the outcome of this war is positive to Russia and not some Pyrrhic victory, and as a consequence of this defeat, not just for Ukraine, but for NATO, US, and as a consequence of some internal processes, let's say, that are happening in the US, US leaves NATO and European countries basically are left one-on-one with Russia. I wouldn't honestly be able to exclude potential of further conflict outside of Ukraine.
Isla, sorry, I don't want to contradict you, but this is like
no, please do.
No, the main thing is
I don't want this to happen.
No. The main thing is like this. This is like a little bit of narrative that it's interesting, but I think it's impossible to happen. Like, because NATO, it's an instrument of US to control and to make the security of Western Europe after the Second World War. Let me put it in a clear way. NATO without US doesn't exist. And let me put in a better way. I can talk freely and surely about Italian situation. Italy lost the Second World War, like Germany, like Japan. So in Italy, we have 127 US military installation. Doesn't mean bases. Installation. In Sicily, we can talk about it in another session. There is one of the 3 MUOS base. So it's something interesting because one is in New Zealand, one in Sicily, one in US. With this system, you can control and let's say organize any type of ballistic, nuclear, drones, everything that you want in all over the world. So the main thing is that it's impossible, this thing. Trump, if he will be elected, can, let's say, ask more money from the European countries to NATO, but not go out, because NATO is like an instrument, a tool of control of US, of Western Europe. So it's like narrative. The second thing, it's what historically the Anglo-American doesn't want, and I can agree with this. It's before the First World War, before the Second World War, the problem was to don't let Germany and Russia to be together. Why? Because what the Russians don't have, it's like productivity and industry. We can check the data. There is not a productivity and industry in Russia. What we have in Germany. So imagine to merge these 2 powers, plus the Russian bureaucracy is German. The last 10 generation of Tsar has German blood, not Russian. So the Catherine the Great was Prussian, was not Russian, was German. So this thing was very complicated because the Anglo-American powers every time were trying to, let's say, cut the ties between Germany and Russia. So imagine if you have a tool of control of the defense that, let's say, push down the production of defense in Europe. And I repeat to you, the only defense industries that is not connected to US, it's the salt in France. And why? Because France has every time, let's say, in and out position, and most of people doesn't know, but people that are interested in NATO, France stay out of NATO 15 years. And this is the real reason why they have their own defense plan. Let's put one example. F-35. F-35, it's a plan where, for example, the wings are made in Italy. Another part is made in UK. Another part is made in Germany. Another part is made in US. With this plan, you can have a good plan for a good plan to create, let's say, the stealth generation for Europe, blah, blah, blah. What is changing in the defense? Check this thing. The next generation aircraft made from Italy will not be made with the US. Now there is an agreement between Italy and Japan. So something in defense is changing fastly, because there will not be so much ties from the US defense program in the European Union. This I can agree. But imagine if you have 127 military installation in one state and you go out. Think about the Mediterranean and what will happen in Northern Africa in the next 20 years. The NATO base, it's in Italy, it's in Naples. So you can control all the Mediterranean. The army, let's say the army force, it's based in Germany. It's not a case. The 2 countries that lost the Second World War are like the main headquarters of NATO. So the narrative is a little bit, in my opinion, out of the reality. What I think, and this is my prediction, take it with like, the war will end when there will be the move from US, like to stop the subsidies really to Ukraine. This move could be made with an agreement. This is my prediction. Agreement could be something acceptable, like Donbass and Crimea, and the problem will be the land bridge given to Russia. And the main point is like for Ukraine to maintain Odessa and the Danube River, because without these two ports, Ukraine it's finished, because they cannot export agriculture, and it's completely out. The second problem will be what we were talking with Ian in the last days. It will be Transnistria or Prednistrovia in Russian. I went there in 2015, so I can tell you directly the situation. The situation of the defense, it's very, let's say, there is no military airport active, because the only airport is in Tiraspol. So all the new, and it's not operative. There is only like one peacekeeping force, technically Russian, but it's like Moldovan with a Russian passport. It's only 1,500 with all the tanks, something like T-62, but it's like very old things. But there is this depot that is called Kobzna. I can put like information in the chat for the people. When I was studying in Russia, in GIMO, the question that I did to my professor is why Russia is still maintaining peace corps in Transnistria. And they said to me, if the Moldovan can access to that depot, Moldovans only can conquer Europe. So obviously it's narrative, but the problem, you can check what there is inside, and there is like, I think 500 trains of ammunition, something like this. And it was the most Western depot during the Soviet Union era. And it's still there. And if you check on the map, it's 10 minutes from the Ukrainian border, probably 3 kilometers, 5 kilometers. So imagine if the situation will be like this, and Ukraine will be created in a neutral, let's say, state. The next problem will be Belarus and Transnistria. What I had some news from my friend that is like a legal advisor in Belarusian, and she said to me, and she sent me the translation of the constitution, and Belarus technically it's neutral in constitution. So could be an agreement to achieve like a pillow, let's say, zone made by Western Ukraine and Belarus. And could be interesting because there is this, let's say, economical deal that can connect like the Baltics through Belarus, Poland, and Ukraine, and arrive to the Black Sea by river. So it could be a good chance also to find an economic way to close the situation and give work and, let's say, chance to, let's say, grow together. Because if you go over, the problem is that war has a cost in human lives, but also in money. So but it's not a situation that it's affordable by anybody like forever. So I hope that I gave you my point.
I kind of want to make a point about NATO, but I want to let it's not 42 talk first.
I just one word. I agree with you, Stefano, that it would be wonderful if there was an agreement. The problem is, to have an agreement, you need someone to agree with, to come to the table of negotiations. And in the West, there simply isn't a figure like that who hasn't discredited themselves in one way or another. So yeah.
So and I actually do agree with that in terms of the original Donbass treaty based what was it called, it's not the Munich Accords, is it? Is that what it was
Minsk.
called?
Minsk.
The Minsk Accords.
Minsk agreement.
Basically with every Western leader saying that they never intended on signing it. It's pretty bad when they want to go to negotiate with Russia. I agree with that entirely. One thing I'll say about NATO in the context of Russia and what we originally said about Russia wanting the Baltics back. Russia is not going to start a direct conflict with NATO. It's just it's a death sentence. Either they lose on the ground or it goes nuclear. Either way, it's just not within Russia's interest. And of course, you can't predict these things. Maybe Russia would win. I would hope not, as someone that lives in America. But you just kind of hope that it doesn't start to begin with. And I think that's what the leadership in Russia would want too. And I think that's where a lot of this narrative in the news media comes from about Russian propaganda, about whether it's Russian gas trying to influence countries like Germany and break them off from NATO, or whether it's propaganda trying to convince populations that Russia is not the enemy or whatnot. And this is all very short-sighted on the West, because there's no European country that has real popular support for leaving NATO, and not compared. I mean, I'm sure there's some, but not compared to the United States. The United States is the main problem. And why is that? Well, I mean, first of all, quite a few NATO countries are getting, basically a free ride in their defense. And that's actually the main problem in the United States. It's not so much that, Americans don't want NATO. It's that Americans see our NATO expenditures, and then they see the shortfall of expenditures on other countries. There's 300 million people in the U.S. It's $20 trillion economy, 400 million people, and the European NATO countries, and it's the same size economy. Yet we spend $800 billion, and the final 20-30% is spent by Europe. And every time this point is brought up, they talk about it like it's Russian propaganda, and it's an attempt to get the U.S. to dissolve NATO. And the simple solution here is just to pay the proper 2%, and it would shut everyone up. If Germany really is worried about the U.S. leaving NATO, and at a moment like this, or if Denmark or whoever, I mean, when you look at the statistics, you're only going to get one of two stats, right? You're going to get the total amount of contributions, so 800 billion US dollars versus 80 billion German dollars, whatnot, or you're going to get the percent of GDP contributed, which is supposed to be 2%. You have some countries like Poland's almost 4%, the US 3.5%, blah blah blah. But they never really put them together. And when you look at the shortfall, like say Germany spends, 1.57% of GDP is what they spent last year. That 0.47% is in the tens of billions. It's nearly $100 billion. And in total, when we're talking about all of Europe, we're talking about several $100 billion that the American taxpayer is subsidizing European defense. And at the same time, and this is kind of a segue into the political situation in Europe, the political parties, both parties, are basically collapsing. Neither voting base is satisfied with what their party's doing. Basically, like say, take Donald Trump, for example, and this is all connected, I promise. But so, a large portion of Republicans refuse to vote for Donald Trump again. They believe in free market capitalism. They believe in some of the tax cuts and a lot of these things, but they just can't get behind the idea of voting for Trump again. So you would think that would reflect in the polls. Well, even with this large percentage of Republicans that refuse to vote for Trump again, Trump is still leading in the polls in most, if not all, battleground states. So what's going on there? Essentially, the far left, or different factions of the left, are also refusing to vote for Joe Biden for a number of different reasons. I mean, if you look at, say, the black vote and the 18 to 29 vote in particular, these are the two biggest ones. And various other different groups as well. Like when you get elected, you make promises. You have to make different promises to different voting blocks in order to get, a collective vote in order to get elected. And then you hope that you can accomplish or satisfy as many of those promises as you can. Well, virtually none of the promises made by Joe Biden were accomplished within this time. I mean, there's been some good things happen, like an infrastructure bill, but it's not much to brag about because the infrastructure is something the government's supposed to take care of anyways. So, like the population sees this, you have far left outrage over what's going on in Gaza, blah, blah, blah. So really what it's down to is, each of these groups and these populations, they want resources going towards whatever their cause is. And they're all seeing that those resources are going to Ukraine. Like, yes, in the big grand scheme of things, the U.S. is a $20 trillion economy, or $24 trillion economy now, something like that. And the U.S. budget is $6 trillion, which is more than $1 trillion over what they rake in tax revenue. So it's all it's borrowed money, borrowed time. And when it comes to tackling any particular issue, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, $60 billion doesn't look like a lot. But in terms of when you take out all the obligated spending, the money that has to go to the military, the money that has to go to running the bureaucracy, that has to go to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, you're only looking at uh, a number left that's in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So that 60 billion, $100 billion is a big chunk of money that could go towards tackling issues that the voters want. So, my kind of point throughout the whole thing is focusing on these other NATO countries. Like, we got to make sure they don't break off, because if they do, then it's going to leave them vulnerable to attack with Russia. Well, they're focusing on the wrong end of the problem. The problem is America is a democratic republic, and if the people in America aren't taken care of, eventually they're going to remove the people in power that are making these decisions, and they might indirectly cause the issue that they're trying to avoid, which is a breakup of NATO. So I mean, that's a bit of crossover between domestic and international policy for the U.S., but it's definitely very important to point out. And really, the issues in America are far deeper and far more systemic than I think people realize. And this goes back to what I was saying about Peter Turchin and predicting civil unrest. The issue of inequality, and not across races, but across different educational groups is the best way to look at it. So high school educated versus some college educated versus people with bachelors versus people with higher elite degrees. Most of the economic growth and the wage growth in America has gone to people with elite degrees and bachelor's degrees. People that that have high school education, compared to inflation, have actually lost wages since the 70s. They make less money. And comparatively to the CPI index, like what's the cost of goods, a lot of times in the CPI, they don't factor in things like homes, healthcare, and I can't remember what the third category is. Maybe it's car prices. I can't really remember, but there's a third category. But inflation is way up, and it's education. That's the final one. The price to get an education is you used to have to work 150 hours in a year to get an education in America in 1970. Now you have to work over 500,000 or 500 hours in a year to afford that same education. The same thing with a house. You're looking at like fourfold increases and what it costs to get these things, and for over 50% of the population, it's not there. Now, politics is politics, and people have their ideological reasons for voting right and left, but the main underlying problem is there's significant groups of people that match up with this high school level education that aren't making enough money, that exist inside of both parties, and that's what you're seeing reflecting in the polls right now, is just a general outrage. People don't really know what exactly they're outraged over, but their life's not good and they can see that, and it's going to result in some serious problems in America this year, if not the next coming 5 years. Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be an extreme level of violence or civil war in America, but there is quite a big risk to NATO from internal issues inside of America, which I will say that's not necessarily what I want. Like, I've been opposed to the NATO stance on the Ukraine war to a certain extent. Now, I can certainly get behind the fact that some amount of support to Ukraine in order to prevent Russia sharing a border with Poland and Moldova and Romania is certainly not in our best interest. But anything beyond that, I think opportunities to take a peace deal should be highly considered, especially if imagine if a peace deal could have been achieved in the first month of the invasion. I don't know what exactly was being talked about in Istanbul, but I imagine what was on the table, or the lands that would have been ceded to Russia, would be far less than what they actually control now. So like, that's kind of my basic stance on it, is it's like a Chinese finger trap. Like, the harder you try to solve the problem in the conventional way, the tighter the finger trap is gonna get on your hand. You have to use some outside some unconventional thinking, and a little bit of wisdom to navigate through these things. And it's just things that I don't see existing in the American establishment right now. And it's actually, Stefano, something you brought up to me when we first got on the phone the other day, when you were talking about funding, and you said, like, I don't understand, what's the goal if the goal wasn't to win the war. Like, if America's abandoning the funding, like, and that's kind of been my problem with the war to begin with, was the way that American politicians have talked about this, and the way that strategists have talked about this since the beginning, is we cannot engage in more effort than what we're doing now, because that would start a war. If we give Ukraine the weapons that they need to win the war, then we bring risk down on ourselves. So the strategy that's been openly talked about, maybe not on CNN or MSNBC, where they're preaching the BS to the masses, but in the back rooms, in the chat channels, or in the podcast interviews, the strategy has always been to get rid of our stockpiles of old stuff, so we can kill as many Russians as we can, and maybe hurt Russia into the future. The goal from the very beginning was never to help Ukraine in the war, and that's kind of my main issue with the whole effort. Is if the goal wasn't to help them win, then the goal should be to prevent the death as many Ukrainians as possible, and to ensure that they retain as much land as they have as possible. And it seems like those two goals were thrown right out the window at the end of March, beginning of April of 2020. What year are we in? 2022, when the invasion started, and they ripped up whatever deal they made in Istanbul.
And I can also add on top of, no, I just also mentioned, if you give your adversary an excuse to invade you, they will. And Europe is not spending the 2%, generally speaking, that is required as part of NATO, right, Ian? Most of them is not, right? So Singapore, which is not in the war zone, we spend 2.8%, and this is considered low, because we dropped down from 5%, slowly drop down, And I did a Singapore video, like I just published like a few hours ago, and it highlights that we have been reducing, and yet we are still at 2.8%. And it's unimaginable that Europe is still not spending 2%, and then they are claiming that Russia is going to invade, and the war is coming. And yeah, so the hypocrisy, the contradiction is there, and there is, it's no surprise that Trump is pissed off, and Trump want to withdraw from NATO, or at least threaten Europe into spending that kind of money, because it just don't make sense. It's just the narrative of Russia is going to invade Europe soon versus their actions. They are not spending their money. It just doesn't gel, and Ukraine just not seeing it for what it is. They still expect that Europe will come and save them, but no, it's not really there.
About the expenditure, I can put like some data for the public. Okay, the goal is 3%. It's not 2%, and there is like states that are not giving the 3%. The over 2%, you have US, United Kingdom, Poland, Greece, Finland, Romania, Hungary, Slovak Republic, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. But this is like the expenditure for NATO. It's not for defense. This is the big difference. So you can see, for example, why countries that have like small, let's say, territory have big expenditure. Let's say, for example, Greece. Because Greece has like one of the biggest expenditure for capital for the problems of the border with Turkey and for Cyprus. So it's like complicated issues in Europe to analyze, like the NATO like expenditure, and I can show you fastly. This is why it's difficult to analyze from outside. Let's put like two small examples. This is like the US installation in Italy and Germany, as I talked before, and I can talk it freely because one, it's 20 minutes far away from my house, but it's in Gedi. You can see in the top that it's called Gedi Torre, and this installation. It's let's say not signed in this map because technically it's not US, but it's NATO, and it's shared Italy, Turkey, and US. Why I'm showing this? Because it's connected also to the nuclear deterrent that there is in Europe. In Germany, so you can see that there's bases everywhere, but the biggest are like in the northeast. It's in Vicenza. It's like ground forces. We have like over 10,000 troops stable. In Germany, you can see that is mostly in the western Germany and southern Germany, because the part that was under the, let's say, the West Germany during the Cold War. You can see that there is no bases in Eastern Germany. About another one interesting thing is, where are the bases in Japan? Technically, the biggest bases are next to you, because they're in Okinawa, and we can see that Okinawa, it's very interesting location, and it was technically occupied by the US till 1972. And I went there 1 year ago, and the presence of US now, it's lower and lower, but it's still big. And you can see that only in Okinawa there is all these bases, only in Okinawa. In Japan, you have a big presence of US bases, and but it's a little bit different because we're not technically, we're partner, but not in NATO. It's like Colombia, it's partner, but not in NATO. And Japan, it's another interesting situation because they were, let's say, able to develop the internal economy and don't invest in defense. For you, an example to let the public understand, the only place in Asia where like the nuclear bombers of US can be repaired, it's in Tokyo. Next to Tokyo, there is an American direct base. It's not like shared or NATO or whatever. About the nuclear deterrent, this is interesting because what I'm saying about the direct conflict between, let's say, only Europe and Russia, I think it's like a lose-lose situation. This is why I think nobody will push something in that situation. This is the only US deterrent shared with NATO countries. That we have Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, Italy, and Turkey. And only these, you have about 150 to 200 nuclear bombs. It's B61, now it's B61 modernized, that can be used with F-35 Tornado and with F-16. So the problem about these bombs, just for the people that don't know, it's not like a ballistic missile, but it's first strike with jet fighters. So it's like a preemptive attack. So it's like a deterrent. It's not like to respond because it's first strike. The other part was like nuclear in Europe. You can see that, let's say, Italy closed his own like nuclear power plants in 1988 after the Chernobyl disaster. And so we stopped like the development of nuclear power plants. But you can see that UK has their own industry and their own nuclear bombs. France also. All the others you have, let's say, I show to you the location of the other nuclear deterrent, let's say, bases. Finishing about NATO and the US dominance. What is like my perception? My perception is that, as Jan said, there is, let's say, more of temptation of Trump and like followers to ask more money from NATO members to like the defense budget. But in another hand, let's say NATO alliance, it's a tool of US of controlling Western Europe. So it's like a little bit of balance. You can see where like there is US bases, you have everywhere, and these bases are like, let's say, controlling especially like the sea power.
But I don't think that United States got bases in Thailand and Vietnam. So that is inaccurate. They definitely have it in Japan, South Korea, and Philippines. So, but in Southeast Asia, other than Philippines, US have no bases.
No,
So-
we have a presence in Thailand and Vietnam. I could show you where a base in Thailand is if you want after.
This is like the US bases with more than 1,000 troops. So there is not small installment. But for example, in Italy, we have only 2 bases with more than 1,000 troops. That is one in next to Naples and one that is like in northeast in Vicenza. But these bases were important before the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain, because Italy was in the border with former Yugoslavia. So now let's see. I had like the last 2 things that you asked before. So about what is changing. Jan said maybe we could save a lot of lands in Ukraine with agreement, but if we can check the economical data, Ian, and we can see about the global budget and defense was not going up before the war in Ukraine. So what happened in the last 2 years? You have like, you can see, except some states, take away Ukraine, that is plus 640%, but mostly of the other states increased the defense budget. And it means more money in the defense complex. It means that someone for sure get gain with the war. It's not. It's also a money thing. It's not only like about ideals and pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, or something else. And about the quantity, we can see that it's a huge amount of budget. It's not about like few millions of euro. If we can make the sum of this one, I think we can pay a lot of tuition fee for the universities, as you said before.
The only last thing to point out really about the U.S. budget, I mean, yes, it's very large, but a great deal of that chunk is not really dedicated to the U.S. ventures abroad, I guess you can say. Like, say, China's budget wholly is for their homeland defense and whatever military ventures and research or whatever they want to produce. A large chunk of that U.S. budget is obligations and not maintenance, but maintaining. So, like, yes, maintenance is part of it, but like maintaining those bases, patrolling sea lanes to protect trade for the globe, not just America, but for the entire globe. So, like, a lot of that budget, you could almost view it as if, say, like you say, NATO is, basically a U.S. Infrastructure or institution for controlling Europe. You could almost say the UN is basically the same thing at this point, because U.S. And U.S. allies basically own the UN votes. Now, of course, China and Russia are involved, and China tries to have influence with it, but it's a structure that the U.S. largely has control over. And I almost view a big part of our military obligations as being like, UN obligations, essentially. Of course, it's not connected to the UN, but it's beneficial to the UN for global stability. So yes, it's big, and yes, we could cut our own budget, but which I actually don't have such an issue with, but it would be to the detriment and the sacrifice of what global security and what's going on in the sea lanes, especially after what's happened in the last decade with Somalia and what's happening now with Yemen, which I chop what's going on with Yemen up to piracy. Of course, it might be piracy with an ideology behind it, because fighting for Gaza or Palestine, but really it's piracy, right? They're targeting cargo ships with valuable cargo going by, and they're affecting global trade in the same sense that the Somali pirates were. So if U.S. reduces that budget, which a great deal of that budget is the Navy, then the U.S. has to back off of patrolling certain sea lanes. I mean, imagine how much it costs to send a destroyer out on a 6-month mission to patrol off of the eastern coast of Africa. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
I
for
wanted
a
to add
ship.
So I also wanted to add, because even though that we look at the budget, we look at US dollar terms, the reality is that a lot of these budgets are just salary, and the salary of different countries is hugely different. So United States might have a very big budget because the salary of the soldiers are so much higher. So when in China, salary is so much lower. So if, let's say, if you adjust the salary, you may see that maybe China is actually spending a lot more money than how we imagine it to be, because of the the PPP kind of thing instead of GDP kind of thing. Like for Russia, it's the same thing, because it seems like they spend a lot lesser, but it's just that their things are cheaper, the salary is lower. And if we were able to ever see a very objective way of comparing, like one man to one man, one equipment to one equipment, we might realize that a lot of this smaller budget or smaller spending is actually a lot. So I just want to highlight a bit about that. The salary makes a huge difference.
That's actually a great point as well. And another thing you can't count out of it is corruption. I mean, there's an enormous amount of corruption in U.S. military spending. I mean, they just I was talking to a friend recently that's in the National Guard, and it's basically like, if you don't spend the amount of money that's been allocated to you, then they just reduce your budget the next year because they think you don't need as much. So they've been eating steak and lobster for like the last month every time they go to National Guard, which is from the point of view for the guys serving in those units, it's like, yeah, like we got to spend this money or we're going to lose it. But from the taxpayer point of view, it's an enormously unsavory prospect that
so this
that
is
money
same.
just gets wasted. But I mean that exists in China and Russia as well. Like,
Yes,
you know,
it's across
people
the world.
compare tank prices like a T-72 or, you know, or a T-90 is half the price of or probably less than half the price of an American Abrams. But, you know, I would guess that the material cost for building a T-90 and the labor that goes into it should make it far less than what the price. I would suggest that there's a bit of corruption in what Russia pays for their equipment as well.
100%. If you just look at how they supply the weapons and the money that is dedicated to Ukraine, most of the money don't even go to Ukraine. Like mass majority don't go to Ukraine. It's used to pay for like administrative stuff and then replenishing stuff, and I 100% bet every of this number is inflated. Like for sure, everything is inflated. So no, this is like corruption, some kind of corruption, or some kind of like cost to doing business. And then this is just normal thing. And like they say that the cutting of budget, if you don't use the budget, they will cut the budget. This is true for all countries, like, which is why you need elected officials, which is why politics works that way. You need elected officials to really look into the things and just cut the budget and force the civil servants or the government workers to actually be more efficient. Because if you just trust them at their own words, everybody will just want more budget. Everybody wants more. It's just how it works.
Just
well,
sorry. No, I wanted only like to say maybe we can do like the last round, like only 5 minutes and close, because it's already 1 hour 45 minutes. But we'll share like the video, like to cut it and whatever.
Okay, I do have one more point about what's going on with military budgets, and this is something that hasn't really evolved with how militaries have evolved. Like for example, Napoleon Bonaparte, great, French Revolution, his aide de camp, General, can't remember his name, but was brilliant, terrible tactician, and didn't fare well, was too cautious on the battlefield, but made a brilliant system and was a brilliant organizer, I guess you can say. And big part of what made our armies successful back then is basically the French government would assign a marshal to a specific front and be like, give them a certain number of resources and then say, get the job done. So there was an incentive on that particular marshal and his aide de camp to find innovative and creative ways to rub pennies together and basically stretch their resources further. And that's just clearly something that doesn't exist with modern militaries today. And it's probably incompatible with the tactics. You can't necessarily, I mean, I guess you could, but like when you assign a general to a particular front, he's gonna say he needs a certain amount of resources, and then Congress is going to give it, and then the same thing's going to happen. Like in a year he may not use all those resources, so at the end of the year they'll go on a spending spree, and then they'll ask for more money the next year. So there definitely needs to be some kind of development on that front in the future for Western and global militaries. But that's all I'll say on that.
Isla, if you want to say something before the end, like to a closing.
I wanted to make a joke about Russian military spending and corruption, but like it would have fit. No comment.
No, you can say it. It's normal.
No, it's too late. I fucked up. Sorry.
No. Make the joke. Now we are curious.
No.
We need a good joke.
Now it's not. It's not gonna work. I failed. Sorry. Sorry. Never mind. It's horrible.
Okay. So we'll remain with the curiosity. Thank you, Isla. Aye. So we had.
Yeah. So my closing is please press like and subscribe, and support Stefano's work, and of course also support New World Geopolitics and DPA as well. Yeah, that's all.
So all the links you will find in the description. Thank you all, and still hope to see you live soon. I'm sure I will see for sure we in November, because I will be in Singapore, but I will manage to find the reunion as soon as possible, as I promised. So thank you for all for your time, and see you soon. Ciao, ciao.
Bye, Stefano. Thanks for the chat.
Bye,
Bye,
bye.
guys.
Ciao.
Goodbye.